They never said her name, not in the house, not on the porch, not even in church. To Elijah Carter, she was just the woman in the photo, faded at the edges, dressed in white, standing stiff under a tree with her hands folded like she was praying or about to run, and every time he tried to ask, his grandmother's eyes would shut, slow and heavy, like closing the door that had been kicked in one too many times. Welcome to Injustice Brown. I'm Marcus Wall. If this story grips your heart, if it makes you feel something heavy, subscribe, speak on it in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. Elijah was 10 when he started noticing the silence. Real silence, not the kind where someone's thinking or tired, but the kind that grows like mold in a room nobody enters. The kind that settles into the bones of a family like dust. They live on the edge of Jackson, Mississippi, in a shotgun house where the floor creaked more than it held. There were 2 Bibles in the house, one in the bedroom drawer and one on the mantel, holding down that old photo like it might float away if nobody kept it still. Elijah would sit on the floor and stare at her. His mother, Sarah Carter. He didn't remember her voice, didn't remember her laugh. What he remembered, what he couldn't forget, was the day the sheriff came. He remembered the way his grandmother clutched his wrist so tight he couldn't feel his fingers, the way the neighbors didn't come outside, the way the dog stopped barking and just watched. That was the day Sarah stopped existing out loud. His grandmother never said she died. She never said she left. She just said, God knows, and then she'd wipe her hands on her apron and go back to shelling peas like the conversation never started. But Elijah knew what he saw: a white man with a silver badge, a black woman who didn't bow her head, a car that drove off with only one person inside. That was 1954, the same year the Supreme Court said schools should stop being segregated. But that didn't mean the South had changed. It just meant the rules got rewritten in smaller print. Elijah was quiet after that, not because he wanted to be, but because he learned early that questions could be dangerous, and truth could get you killed. At school, he told kids his mama went north, said she found work in Chicago. Maybe she'd send for him one day. Maybe she was building a new house with stairs and windows that opened all the way. He said it so many times he started to believe it, just to keep the ache from crawling into his throat. But at night, when the wind rattled the tin roof and the house moaned like it missed someone, Elijah would stare at that photo and wonder, what did she say? What made him take her? And why was everybody so afraid to speak her name? Sometimes he'd whisper it under his breath, Sarah, just to see if the world would shake. It never did. It just kept on spinning like it didn't care. But Elijah cared, even at 10, even when he didn't understand. That silence settled in him like a weight he couldn't put down. It lived in his shoulders, in his chest, in the space behind his eyes. It shaped the way he walked, the way he looked at white folks, the way he kept his head down even when he wanted to raise it. He never told anyone that. The night she disappeared, he'd followed them, not far, just far enough to see the car stop. By the river, far enough to hear her scream, far enough to know she never made it out. He never told because he knew what would happen if he did. They'd say he was lying. They'd call it troublemaking. They might even say he did it, so he kept it, carried it, like a secret carved into his ribs. He told himself he'd forget, that time would bury it. But time doesn't bury what the world refuses to name. It just passes it down. And Elijah Carter, he grew up knowing that silence was more than a lack of words. It was a warning, a wound, a story waiting to be told. Elijah Carter had strong hands, grease-stained, calloused, steady. Hands that could fix an engine blindfolded. Hands that knew how to hold a crying child and not shake, even when the world around him did. By 1972, Elijah had built a life most folks would call stable. A wife, 2 sons, a house modest, but his. Bought it with overtime from the auto plant just outside Montgomery. He kept his head down, showed up early, didn't talk much, never gave them a reason to look twice. He didn't have the luxury of mistakes. There was a rhythm to the factory. Clocks punching time into men's bones. Machines louder than voices. Elijah liked it that way. It drowned out the parts of him that still whispered her name. Sarah. He didn't speak it. Not even now. Not even in the dark, when he lay beside his wife and wondered if he was raising his boys to be safe or to be small. And then came Robbie Jenkins, fresh-faced, barely 23, white, the kind of man who smiled when the boss walked by and smirked when Elijah did. Always had a joke, always said no offense, old man right before saying something that cut. At first, Elijah ignored it. He'd learned a long time ago what came from pushing back, so he kept his eyes on his work. Fix what needed fixing. Let the rest slide. Until the toolbox went missing. Robbie claimed it was his. Said he left it by the tire press. Said Elijah must have taken it by mistake. Elijah knew it was a lie. The box had initials on it, RJ, in white paint, barely dried. But management didn't blink. Didn't ask Elijah a thing. Didn't check the cameras. Didn't want the truth. They just called him into the office, told him they were letting him go. Pending investigation. Investigation never came. What came was a pink slip and shame and a mortgage payment he couldn't make. Elijah didn't yell, didn't beg. He nodded once, gathered his things, and walked out the same way he walked in, like he'd never been there. That night, he sat at the kitchen table for hours, long after the lights were out. His wife stood in the doorway, arms folded tight across her chest. You didn't do nothing. Why you let him? He didn't answer. What could he say? That he saw what happened to people who pushed back. That he still heard his mama's voice in the trees, crying out. That his silence wasn't weakness, it was armor. A week later, they lost the house. Moved in with her sister on the other side of town. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 5 people. His sons shared a mattress on the floor. Marcus, the older one, was 7, sharp as a nail. Always watching, always listening. One night, he asked, Daddy, why we leave our house? Elijah looked him in the eyes, tried to find the words, tried to be a father who told the truth. But all he said was, sometimes things ain't fair. And when they ain't, you keep your head low and you keep moving. Marcus didn't ask again. That became Elijah's lesson. The one he taught every time a door closed or a neighbor stared along. Be careful. Be smart. Don't speak too fast. Don't walk too proud. Don't raise your voice in a room full of white men, because survival, in his world, wasn't about being right. It was about being small enough not to be seen. And Elijah, he knew exactly how small a man had to get to stay alive. He told himself it was protection. He told himself he was keeping his boys safe. But in the quiet, when they were sleeping and the house was still, Elijah would stare at his hands and wonder, what kind of man do you become when you teach your sons to swallow fire? What happens when they forget how to burn? Marcus Carter didn't walk through the world quiet like his father. He had too much storm in his chest, too much blood that ran hot, not slow. He didn't want to survive this life. He wanted to live it. By 1998, he was 17, lanky, fast-talking, smart as hell, top 10 in his high school, already tutoring kids older than him in math. His teachers said he was going places, but none of them knew what it felt like to be brilliant and still feel invisible, or worse, targeted. They moved north when he was 10, Chicago, a second chance, his father called it. Elijah had found work as a night janitor, got them a 2-bedroom walk-up near Bronzeville. Told Marcus this was the place where people build things, music, marches, movements. But what Elijah didn't say, what he never said, was that fear had followed them, packed its bags too, every morning before Marcus left for school. Elijah would stop him at the door. Keep your hands where folks can see him. Don't talk back. Don't run, even if you didn't do nothing. Same speech, every day, like a ritual. Marcus hated it. He'd roll his eyes and say, Dad, it's 1998, not 1950. And Elijah would just nod, low and quiet, like he was praying Marcus would never find out how wrong he was. But Marcus did find out. One Thursday afternoon, walking home with his headphones on, he crossed 47th just as the squad cars pulled up, sirens silent, lights spinning. Before he could blink, 2 officers had him on the hood of the car, cold metal against his cheek. One of them barked, "Where's the bag?" Marcus said he didn't know what they were talking about. They patted him down. No bag, no weapon, nothing. Still, they kept him there. 20 minutes. Said he fit a description. No apology when they let him go. No eye contact. Just a warning. Watch yourself out here. Marcus didn't go home right away. He sat on the curb outside the corner store, fist clenched, throat burning. All he could hear was his father's voice. Don't run. Don't talk back. Don't move too fast. But none of that had saved him. None of it had meant anything. When he finally made it home, Elijah was already sitting in his chair by the window, The one that creaked every time he leaned forward like he wanted to say something, but never did. Marcus didn't wait. He slammed the front door and stood in the middle of the living room, shaking. "They put me on the car," he said. "Cops, just now. Didn't ask. Didn't care. You hearing me?" Elijah looked up, nodded. "Just once. That all you got?" Marcus snapped. "I get treated like trash, and you sit there nodding like it's normal." "It is normal," Elijah said, voice low. Marcus stepped closer. "Why do you always take it? Why do you always act like that's just the way things are?" Elijah didn't answer, just looked at him, the son of his, all muscle and anger and flame. Marcus was breathing hard now. "I'm not you. I won't live scared. I won't bow down just to make them comfortable." Elijah turned back to the window. The street outside was quiet, rain tapping the sill. He whispered, "I just want you to come home at the end of the day." Marcus's voice cracked. "Yeah, and what kind of life is that? Always surviving, never speaking." For a long time, neither of them said anything, just the sound of water dripping from the fire escape, the hum of the fridge. Two men, across decades, carrying the same wound differently. Elijah didn't explain the fear, didn't talk about the jobs he'd lost, or the names he'd been called, or the day he watched his mother get dragged away and never come back. He didn't say how hard it was to raise a boy in a world where skin was still a weapon, because he knew Marcus wouldn't understand. Not yet. So he just stared out the window, and Marcus stood behind him, fists still clenched, chest still burning. That night, a silence settled between them. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that screams through the walls. By the time Marcus Carter turned 33, he had learned how to wear a suit that didn't choke him. He'd finished college, married a woman who taught history like it was gospel, and landed a steady job at a law office downtown. Paralegal work, mostly paperwork, contracts, filing. But he held onto the hope that truth lived somewhere in the fine print. That justice wasn't just a word carved above courtrooms, but something breathing in them. He still remembered the first time he walked past the judge's bench. Polished wood, the flag behind it, the way everyone stood when the judge entered. It felt like something sacred until it did in single quotes until Jamal. Jamal was 17. His cousin on his mama's side, played drums in church, big laugh, big dreams. Talked about architecture like it was magic, how buildings could rise from nothing and hold people together. One night, he was driving home from a birthday party, borrowed his uncle's Buick. Wrong neighborhood, wrong time. Two cops pulled him over. The report said he didn't comply, said he reached for something. There was no body cam footage, no weapon found, just shattered glass, blood on the seat, and a mother who never stopped screaming. They said he was a threat. Marcus got the call after midnight. His aunt's voice barely made sense. All he heard was, "They shot my baby. They shot him." He rushed to the hospital. Too late. The coroner said the bullet entered through Jamal's neck. Close range. Marcus stood outside the room, fists clenched at his sides. He hadn't cried yet, not because he wasn't broken, but because grief didn't have time to breathe. When you were already drowning in rage, a week later, the grand jury declined to press charges. Officers acted within reason. Able fear, that phrase, reasonable. Fear, it followed Marcus for weeks, haunted him in his sleep. He'd spent years reading legal language, but those two words felt like a knife dipped in honey. Jamal's mother wanted answers. She wanted someone to say the word murder, but nobody would. So Marcus helped her file a civil suit. It was the least he could do. They built the case, piece by piece, witnesses, phone records, dash cam timestamps, everything that should have mattered. And then the judge threw it out. Didn't even make it to trial. Said the officers had immunity. Said the case lacked legal standing. Marcus sat in the courtroom and felt the walls close in. His aunt clutched a tissue so tight it shredded in her hands. The officers weren't even there, just their lawyers. Smug, stiff, and silent. Elijah was in the back row. Old now, Key leaning on the bench beside him, eyes glassy but sharp. He didn't say a word, just stared at the bench, the seal, the flag, like he was looking at a machine that had chewed through generations. When the judge dismissed the case, Jamal's mother collapsed in the hallway. Marcus tried to catch her, but she went down slow. Like all the weight she'd been carrying finally had permission to drop. No one said murder. No one said justice. They just said move on. That night, Marcus sat in his car for nearly 2 hours, parked outside the apartment. hands on the wheel, engine off. He thought about his father, about that night years ago when he stood in the living room screaming, "Why do we always take it?" He thought about Elijah's silence, how it wasn't weakness, it was weariness, a kind of knowing Marcus hadn't understood, not until now, because Marcus had done everything right, the degrees, the job, the language, and still, Jamal was gone still. The law bent backward to protect the ones with the badge. Marcus walked into his apartment, kissed his wife without speaking, and sat on the floor of the living room like a child. He finally cried, not just for Jamal, but for Sarah, for Elijah, for the courtroom that closed its doors like a casket again and again. That night, he realized something he couldn't unknow. This system wasn't broken, it was built this way. Marcus Carter never meant to become a teacher, but after everything, the law firms, the courtrooms, the verdicts that never landed, he found himself drawn to the front of a small classroom on the west side of Chicago, teaching community college kids how the system really worked. Not the polished textbook version, the lived one, the painful one, the kind that wore scars. He wore a blazer that didn't quite fit and glasses that slid down his nose. But his voice was steady, tired sometimes, but sure. It was his daughter who cracked it open. 14, curious, blunt in that way only young girls can. One evening, she was helping clear the dishes, and out of nowhere, she asked, "Daddy, why don't we ever talk about Grandma Sarah?" Marcus froze mid-step. She pointed to the old photo on the bookshelf, the one that always sat just out of reach, a woman in a white dress, standing under a tree, face sharp with strength, eyes full of knowing. We talk about Nana and Grandpa Elijah, but not her. Why? Marcus didn't answer right away. Because truth can take a lifetime to grow teeth. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, Marcus sat across from Elijah. The old man was 83 now, body soft with age, eyes dim, but still holding something sharp behind them. Marcus placed the photo on the table between them. "I need to know," he said softly, "about her." For a long time, Elijah didn't speak, just stared at the picture like it might speak first. Then, in a voice that had grown brittle with time, he began. "Her name was Sarah Carter, my mama. She didn't take nothing she didn't earn, raised me by herself, grew vegetables in the back, paid taxes on land her daddy left her, 1 acre, flat and stubborn, just like her." He paused, swallowed hard. "One Sunday, she wore her best dress, white, with yellow stitching at the sleeves. We went to church like always, and during the final hymn, he walked in. Sheriff Dillard said she hadn't paid her land fees, said she was trespassing on property that didn't belong to her." Marcus leaned in, not breathing. She told him he was lying, told him she had the papers, told him to come back with a warrant, not a threat. I'll never forget how her voice didn't shake. Elijah's hands trembled now. They dragged her out anyway, right there, in front of the pastor, in front of God. A long silence followed. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. And then, "I followed," Elijah said. "Didn't mean to, just my feet moved. I watched them drive her out past the edge of town, by the river. I heard her scream, and then, nothing." He looked down. "I never saw her again." Marcus wiped his face with both hands. All this time, he'd known pieces, shapes, but now, the edges had names, and blood. Elijah looked up, tears in his eyes. "I thought keeping it down would protect you, all of you, but silence didn't save her. It just buried her twice." The next morning, Marcus filed a request with the county archives. It took weeks, more paperwork than it should have, dead ends, mismatched dates, but eventually he found it. A single, handwritten report, Sheriff Dillard's file. The language was cold, interfered, non-compliant, subject removed for questioning, no record of release, no signature, no follow-up. Marcus took it to a journalist he trusted, a black woman who built her career telling stories people tried to erase. The piece ran on the evening news, a full segment. What happened to Sarah Carter? They showed her photo. Said her name, said it out loud. And people listened. Old neighbors remembered. The church confirmed. Even the city's historical commission opened a review. The family gathered in Marcus's home that Sunday. 3 generations, daughters, grandsons, cousins, all in one room, plates of food untouched. And when Sarah's face came up on the screen bright brave, impossible to forget. Nobody spoke for a while, because sometimes silence is what truth breaks. Elijah sat in his chair, wrapped in a blanket, barely breathing. But when the reporter said her courage should never have been hidden, he reached out and touched the screen with 2 fingers. She was brave, he whispered. And for the first time in 70 years, the silence let go. There's a kind of peace that don't come easy, a quiet kind, the kind you earn. Years later, I watched my daughter walk into school, backpack high on her shoulders, eyes straight ahead. She doesn't look back at me. She walks like she owns her steps, like she knows the ground is hers, and maybe that's the win. She stands taller than I ever did at her age, talks louder, learns quicker, corrects teachers when they misquote the past, tells her friends who Sarah Carter was like it's required reading. She asked me once, why didn't they want us to know these stories? I told her the truth. They didn't want us to remember, because if we remembered, we might start asking why, and once you start asking why, you stop accepting less. That silence they taught us, it didn't come from peace. It came from fear, from knowing that an aim too loud, a back too straight, a truth too sharp could cost you everything. They told us to be grateful, to keep our heads down, to smile, even when our bones ached. They told us not to make trouble, but silence never kept us safe. Truth did. Names kept in the dark don't disappear, they wait. They wait to be spoken, to be lifted, to be honored. Sarah Carter was my grandmother, but she wasn't just ours. She was every woman who stood up and got disappeared, every man who learned to bow before he spoke, every child who grew up asking questions no one would answer. They told us to forget, but we remembered anyway. My father carried her story in his chest until it cracked him open. He thought silence would keep us alive, and maybe, in his time, it did. But survival ain't the same as living. Now, we teach her name in my classroom. I say it out loud every semester. I put her face on the screen, tell my students about her land, her voice, her fight, and when I do, I watch something shift in them, like they're hearing their own blood speak, because this story, it ain't just ours, it's yours. It's all of us who were told to forget, who were told to shrink, to fold, to hush. But we didn't. We held the pain. We passed it down. We carried it in our hands like old letters and folded flags. We carried it in funeral songs and side-eye glances and names we couldn't say. And now we carry the fire. To my daughter, she knows who she is. She knows where she comes from. Not just by name, but by truth. She walks with Sarah in her bones. She walks with Elijah's silence and my questions and Jamal's absence. She walks with all of it. She walks forward, because we're done burying what happened. Done waiting for permission to feel it. Done being grateful for scraps. We're not just survivors anymore. We are witnesses. And once you witness something, you're responsible for it. That's what I tell my students. That's what I tell my daughter. We don't carry shame. We carry memory. We carry names. We carry truth. And truth, it don't die. It waits.